Good morning, everyone. Christopher Zhang from the Western Riverside Council of Governments. Thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of the conversation. Hopefully, we provide a glimpse as to how we have utilized big data. We've started to utilize big data. I'm here to present a travel behavior analysis that our agency conducted for our member agencies utilizing big data. The main reason why I'm here today is to discuss how we utilize big data for our transportation uniform mitigation fee program. The program really accomplishing its goal of accommodating for trips on major arterials for travel within Western Riverside County. There's a request to better understand this question. So we commenced a travel behavior analysis via an origin destination assessment and utilizing big data and various other commuting data sources. So our main data source was the Streetlight data platform, which provides data points from smartphones and navigation devices. We also utilized California Household Travel Survey data and the longitudinal employer housing dynamics survey data. One qualitative conclusion that I found was that the more established jurisdictions, so either an older jurisdiction or a jurisdiction that offers that has the land uses that can be utilized throughout the day, they had a larger share of trips stay within the jurisdiction. And I think we could continue to utilize big data. And that's kind of our push, is we want to utilize big data to help answer these questions, because really and I'll kind of come back to it at the end. You know, our focus has been kind of from a transportation policy, it's really been focused on the trips outside of the region. And so, you know, we wanted to bring this data forward to show that, you know, there are a lot of our trips that are staying within the city. Our analysis did provide a lot of talking points as an agency, but also for our jurisdictions. Our analysis commenced because of a question that came out of our TUNF program. Our TUNF program really commenced because of a collective effort from our member agencies, and they needed a way to address congestion, because traffic, you know, they did find that traffic did not stop at jurisdiction boundaries. And, you know, that's kind of saying something for a jurisdiction to admit, because jurisdictions, they really stay within their boundaries, and, you know, having them kind of discuss issues that go beyond their boundaries is a big step. And our big data pushes, we've really tried to bring up how powerful big data can be to answer the types of questions that really may come up from city council meetings and planning commission meetings. We've had demonstrations of big data to our jurisdiction staff going back a few years now, but our jurisdictions are just quite busy. So, however, we are still trying, and we are going to keep trying to bring data into the conversation, because we do believe it can be a very powerful tool to answer questions in real time. So this travel behavior analysis was hopefully a good start to show how powerful big data can be for local government. It is quite expensive. But when you look at the traditional tools, we may have been able to utilize data from the travel demand model, or rely on household travel survey to answer the questions, but it would have probably taken longer, and it probably would not have been as accurate, because it utilizes inputs that aren't as certain as big data. And so
I am Darren Welch. I am the National Geospatial Manager for HNTB. I'm leading a team that manages and discovers, delivers, deploys based solutions, both custom and off the shelf. GIS, or geospatial, obviously is very broad discipline, and it tends to touch all aspects of transportation decision making, and equity is certainly at the forefront of all of our minds now. And hopefully I can share with you today some of the emerging patterns and areas where at least we're putting focus and seeing more focused and more innovation applied. want to set this up with describing first the challenge. And the first one being just the lack of data. And we've talked about big data already, but I like to define that not just in terms of volume, but also in terms of data that is yet to be better understood. So misunderstood data, data that has not been processed, analyzed, refined to really help inform us, to be something more meaningful and to help us be better at decision making as it affects the transportation equity of our communities. We also have seen a low utilization of geography. That is a pattern that certainly my team is trying to make a difference in the use of location, the use of space, and its overlay and influence with big data or misunderstood data as well. And lastly, we really see an importance of including outreach or stakeholder engagement as part of our equity analysis. We use Teralytics data, also uses a similar approach to streetlights and uses kind of cell phone based movement. We were able to establish those major recreational centers and centroids in a GIS layout, and we were able to overlay that as part of our data-driven analysis. Now, many agencies are starting to classify kind of these equity measures in different ways. They may be called equity priority communities. They may be called, priority populations, and they may use different metrics. And I think that's important to think about as well, of how are you as an agency defining equity? How are you educating others on how those measures were arrived at? And how are you using that data, especially with location, to influence things like future transportation decision making? The important thing is to always use a single system or a single software solution, a single database, if you will, to always gather that information and understand it, right? Coming back to big data being often misunderstood. Are we collecting information through a variety of tools, perhaps, that is in a central source of truth that we can further understand and analyze the information, a proof of concept? What we're able to do and what we're calling an equity dashboard is really with an overlay of all this engagement, participation, and census block group data in this example. Where is our outreach effective? Where are we getting the most outreach? And we can query to see in what communities is that happening? And we can be very specific.
So starting off with our why. So we started our research here during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the topic of the effects of the pandemic was really relevant to us, and we want to see how it's affecting the community around us. Then we also looked at the public transportation industry and some of the priority goals. So looking at the California Transportation Plan, for example, we saw this topic of public transit equity for their goals for 2040 and repeated again in 2050. So then the COVID-19 pandemic came, and the first case in January 6 came to North America, and this caused a disrupt in the industry. Just 3 months later, we saw ridership drop by about 90% across North America. And 1 month later, RTA, Riverside Transit Agency, cut their schedule in half and reduced to a Sunday schedule. And so we want to see what effect this had on the community.
I'm going to be going over the data that we used, the tools that we used, and then how we used those data and tools in conjunction with each other to quantify public transit equity. So the first major source of data that we needed was information about the public transportation system in question, which is the Riverside Transit Agency. We use something called the General Transit Feed Specification, or GTFS for short. This is open source data that's published by transportation agencies. And the next major source of data we looked at was census data. You would typically go to the census.gov website to gather this data. However, we ended up using the ESRI database a lot more, and was identifying those disadvantaged communities. We developed that disadvantage index that Holly talked about using indicators of poverty, income, and education system. And so what can we conclude from these results? Well, We saw that the service changes from the RTA seem to assist the most disadvantaged populations. And also based on our literature review, we found that disadvantaged populations are a lot more likely to be dependent on transportation services, public transportation services. And so this is a big win for public transportation mobility and public transit equity, and also mobility justice for these disadvantaged communities.